And welcome. This is the Investor Coaching Show. Paul Winkler, along with Mr. Ira Work, covering, well, the financial talk of the week, what's been going on, markets. So I'm sure that many of you watched the debate this week. I was on an airplane flying in. Tried to keep my iPad really, a little bit darker, so that it was because, they could turn off all the lights. It's like nighttime, of course. I'm flying back, so I turned it way down and watched, and that was entertaining. It made a flight go a lot quicker, watching that whole debate go on, and it's just interesting because people wonder how is a change in presidency, if one should happen, or retaining the current president, or how do elections affect stock markets? And the answer is not a whole heck of a lot,
and not for very long.
No, not for very long. It's the reality of it is that they don't affect markets a whole heck of a lot. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal: stocks typically climb regardless of who is in the White House. Investors...
You did a whole video on this last month, didn't you?
Yeah.
Not only based on who's in the White House, but who's in the House of Representatives, who's in the Senate, which party, what happened with the different markets during each one of them. Mm-hmm. And they can get that on the website, can't they?
Yeah. And
where is that?
That is paulwinkler.com/election.
I believe that's it.
I think that's right. I think that's basically what we did. But I thought it was interesting. Wall Street Journal must have been listening to it because they did a whole article. No, they didn't. They weren't listening to me because they only used one area of the market, which is what the media always does. It's all they look at. The whole market to them is the S&P 500.
Well, that's very easy to explain because it's the companies in the S&P 500 that are actually advertising in their newspaper.
And 20%, though, is still 20% is still just those FANG stocks. You just wonder. That just seems like an accident waiting to happen.
I looked it up just a moment ago. Because we were talking about investors using historical returns, and they're only using short term. Mm-hmm. And I know this because when clients come to me, they're looking at their portfolio and saying, well, the S&P, the market has gone so far up. The market has gone up so much. Mm-hmm. And I'll ask the question that we're famous for asking. Well, which market? Mm-hmm. And they'll say the S&P 500.
Right.
So to talk about to mention something that we were talking about a little bit earlier. The S&P 500 from 2000 through 2019 has only had a 5.9% rate of return.
One of the worst performing areas of all different markets that you would hold over that period of time. That is exactly right.
Russell 2000 small cap was 7.7.
Right. And even international, all the international asset categories, more than that. Yeah, exactly. So, and it's interesting because this Wall Street Journal had another article, and I'll get back to the first one in a second. But it's stocks snap 3-week winning streak. So I pulled that. I grabbed that article yesterday and pulled it out, and because I had a sneaking suspicion what it was going to say. The S&P 500 ticked higher Friday, but logged a loss for the week, snapping a 3-week winning streak. So I went and looked at, just for the fun of it, emerging markets value stocks, up 2.5% for the week. Small value U.S. stocks up over 1.5%. International small value up almost 1.5%. International value stocks up a little bit over 1.5%. Emerging markets up 1.6%. So the S&P 500 was the only area of the market down this week. It was the only one down. And I just thought it was so funny because, you would think when you pull that article out that you think, oh my goodness, it's the beginning of the end. Right. Well, maybe it is the beginning of the end for one area of the market.
So with that, the top 10 top mistakes millionaire investors regret making.
All right. Lay it on me.
In the survey, wealthy investors have cited failing to adequately diversify their portfolio and not having a financial plan earlier in their life as their top regrets. It says here more than 1/3.
Well, let's hit that before you said so 1/3. Okay, you're going to give a stat on that same thing, or
more than 1/3. 38% of investors said they lean too heavily on historical returns. So, and that's what I said. And if I see it from our clients,
sure,
they're looking at the past 10 years.
They look at short-term performance. Exactly.
Not far behind was 35% who cited not having sought advice.
Mm-hmm.
And coming in third at 21% was lack of diversification. The survey said a collection of their mistakes and do not knows. And we talk about this. You know what you know, you know what you don't know.
Right.
The problem is you don't know what you don't know. Made up the remaining 6%.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes on to say that it is encouraging that seeking advice is deemed fundamental to success by millionaires, as it shows that the do-it-yourself investing and not having a regularly reviewed plan is typically a path full of costly pitfalls.
Mm-hmm.
He furthermore noted that lack of diversification was in some ways bound to make the top 3 because it is universally regarded as an investor's best tool to mitigate risks and capitalize on the opportunities that arise, such as what you were just talking about with the emerging markets.
Mm-hmm.
He pointed out that the top 3 mistakes are tightly linked to investors not having sought advice, but investing your hard-earned money could appear as dangerous to some. And he says, yet nothing could be further from the truth. Not investing is likely to be more dangerous to your wealth over the longer term.
And the thing you got to be really, really careful about is where you get advice, because a lot of times what happens is the financial advisors who are driven to try to sell something are going to use past performance. So they're going to do and make the same exact mistake you would have made. So you got to be super, super careful about that. And how many times, Ira, have we seen people walk in here and they have these portfolios full of 5-star funds?
Oh, all the time.
They walk in, they got it. And I know that they've got an advisor, if they own, or they're doing it themselves and making that same mistake, that advisor has just purchased those funds because they use past performance as a guide. So they own all, and you think, well, does that make sense to own 5-star funds? No, that's because that star rating is based on recent past performance, 3-5 year returns, and it's returns versus the benchmarks or their peers. And the reality of it is past performance is no indication of future performance. You're looking at a problem. But I'm going to go back to that one thing that you said about not starting early enough, because I think that's a really, really important thing that gets overlooked. Let's say you had somebody that was sticking $10,000 away per year, and they're just investing that, and they did it, and they pulled it off for like a 40-year period. They did that for a 40-year period. They have almost $5 million today if they'd done that. But if they just started 10 years later, and they waited 10 years to start doing that, instead of $4 million, it's 1.8. I mean, almost $5 million versus 1.8. Now, if they waited, let's say they said, hey, I got this house, I got kids, I got college, I got this, I got that, and they started, and they, instead of doing it, they started just 20 years later, but they did it age 45, let's say. Instead of that $5 million, it's $630,000. And that's where you run into problems, is that time is your friend. And number one, you go, I don't know how the heck I'd be able to save that amount of money. And, the reality of it is you don't know what you don't know. There may be things that you're doing where you can free up money, where you're spending money on things. And you're basically, I see people use rules of thumb when they buy a house. And the rules of thumb that they use for what they can afford are driven by the real estate industry or the mortgage industry. And that's how they determine what their house payment should be, is based on what somebody told them they could afford. And you may look at it as a planner and go, maybe you might not want to do that, or the way they buy cars, or the way they handle debt, or the way they handle college education expenses, or the way they handle their taxes, or the way they there's so many things that you may be throwing money away and you don't even realize you're doing it because you don't know what you don't know. And as time goes on, it's easier when you're younger. But when you really can get into some hot water is when you get older and you don't know what you don't know about taxation as far as how Social Security is affected by income taxes, how Medicare is affected by income taxes, your premiums are affected by taxes, how, taking distributions on when you're dealing with cost basis and determining non-qualified accounts and taxation of non-qualified accounts versus regular taxable accounts, and using pre-tax investments versus post-tax investments, and just a myriad of different types of things, let alone investments, how investments are managed, how you can be wasting and throwing a ton of money out the window and not even realizing it. So I think it's critical, not only to start early, but, the reality of it is that trainers, when it comes to losing weight, eat less, move more is a pretty simple rule. And there are only 2 rules where you've got thousands of rules when it comes to taxes, investing, returns, asset class diversification, correlations, how to put portfolios together. And now, not having somebody to coach and guide you through all of that, I mean, shoot, we're having a hard enough time with 2 rules. Eat less, move more.
It's 50% more rules.
50%.
For successful investing.
No, that's just investing. I'm adding taxes in this,
Yeah, I'm just talking about successful investing. It's 50% more rules. Own stock, diversify, and rebalance.
Well, I would say, buy low, sell high, diversify, don't time the market, don't stock pick, make sure that you use correlations.
See, this is why they're now coming to me. I have less rules. I just figured it out. I have less rules for my clients.
You're nicer.
So you were talking about how much you cut your potential earnings growth by waiting 10 years.
Yes.
I like to look at it the other way.
Okay.
So if somebody starts at 25 and they have a goal of $1 million at the age of 65, and they got a 10% return.
How much money do they got to put away?
They got to put away $188 a month. If they wait 10 years, they have to put away $506 a month. It's almost 3 times the amount. If they wait till 45, they have to put away almost $1,500 a month. Now, the problem is if people didn't start with that 188, chances are they might not be making the money to be putting away $1,500. Right. And they're not going to be disciplined enough to put away that much money.
Right.
So, and that's really what we call the cost of procrastination.
Yeah. Well, I look at, what can we put away? And the reality of it is that, if you get up to that 10%, 10 to 15% of income, putting that away, you're probably going to be just fine. It's the reality of it. Now, if you wait, it's going to have to be 20, 25, 30, 40%. And living, and at that point in time in your life, I mean, think about, I'll have more income later. I can put more away later on in life. As time goes on, there's this really interesting thing that happens with people, is they start to realize that they don't have forever on the planet. And, just when you are having to save way bigger proportion of your income to catch up and make up for lost time. Now, because you think about it, how much money did I put away? If I put away $10,000 a year for 40 years, how much did I put away? $400,000. Right. What did I end up with? $5 million. How much did I put away? $300,000. What did I end up with? 1.8. Whoa, that's a big. There wasn't a whole lot less that I put away, but there's a whole lot less that I ended up with. So time is what gives you so much of the return. Is something to really, really lock in your brain. Time is your buddy when it comes down to it. But here's the other thing to think about. If you're having to do what I was saying, which is you're having to put up a way more money out of your paycheck just to get to that $1 million goal that you had in his example. Now, I used 10% rate of return. I don't know what return you used.
I was using 10.
You used 10. Okay. So if you're doing that, you're getting to that point in your life when you're in your 40s and your 50s and you're going, the clock's running. I'm not going to be here forever. I may not want to be. This money that I'm having to save for retirement, it becomes even more of a dilemma that you're thinking about, honey, wouldn't it be great if we just maybe took a few more trips right now in our 40s and our 50s? The kids are finally out of the house. Oh, no, we've got to save for retirement because we didn't do that early on. That, to me, is the heartbreaking scenario that we find ourselves with when we don't start early.
Well, and the thing is, it's, especially for the younger people that might be out there listening today, if you can't start with the 10%, which is basically the financial planning rule, the guidance rule, 10% of what you earn, start with 5%. Mm-hmm. And then each year, increase it by 1% to get to 10.
And that's a great tool right there.
Because part of the problem is, we're 25 years old, and I remember thinking, when I was starting this business at 23 and, thinking I'll retire at 65, and like, oh my God, that is like so far away. I mean, I got plenty of time to just have a good time, and then I can start saving in 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is. Right. And that's a lot of the thinking that I see from a lot of young people. They think they got all this time. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that as people make more money, they tend to develop a lifestyle to the more money.
Sure.
It's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to buy a new car.
Yeah.
And now they have a car payment. And then 3 years, 4 years later, they want another new car.
Yeah.
So they trade it in, or they want to get a bigger house, or maybe they want a 4Runner, or whatever it might be. So the more money they make, the more toys they buy. Mm-hmm. And that becomes another big part of the problem. So if you start out of high school and you're getting a job, start putting away 5%. Mm-hmm. Or sit down with a planner who can help you look at what your 401k is and figure out how much do you need to put away to get all of the money they're going to match. It might be 6%. Yeah. And then increase each year.
Yeah, and it's critical to make sure, we're throwing numbers around right here. And let's say that, I look at this and I say, okay, let's say it's 30-year period. Just let me use that, go back to that number again. And let's say that I don't get the return that I was talking about. I said, 10% return, $10,000 a year grows to about $1.8 million if that's my rate of return. But let's say that I mess up and I just make a few minor mistakes. Not even as bad as what the data that we see that investor returns have actually been. But now I get an 8% return. Well, that's not going to make much of a difference, is it? It's actually 50% less money. 50% less money when the return is just 2% lower per year over that same amount of deposit, same everything. So making sure that you don't make the mistakes, the investing mistakes that, look at the millionaires. And these are people that are fairly intelligent people, and look at their regrets and learn from them. Good thing to look at because, it's a lot more fun to learn from other people's mistakes. Paul Winkler, listening to the Investor Coaching Show right here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Along with Ira Work, we'll be back right after this.